Hey, badass black girls, and they making big moves. Hey, badass black girls, nothing that you can't do. They are the future, I'm trying to tell ya. They want the best, no time to settle. They got the strength to handle the pressure. These are the queens, nobody better. Yeah, changing the narrative, that is imperative. They about to rock this. Tell the women that you got this. Got no time for people who are toxic. It's all love, good vibes. You know I got your back, girl. Talking issues that matter. This is badass black girl, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Badass Black Girl. Today, we have Lynell George with us. She is the author of an exciting new book titled A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky. Hi, Lynell.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Lynell, would you please introduce yourself to those who don't know you? How would you describe Lynell George?
I am a writer, journalist and essayist primarily, but I dabble in a lot of different sorts of writing. I just wrote some fiction again recently, but I'm situated here in Los Angeles. I'm a longtime journalist and researcher, and yeah, I think that's how I would describe myself.
Let's talk a little bit about your journey. How did you become who you are today? What are some of those moments that you remember where you realized, I want to do this. I want to be a writer. I want to be involved in research. I want to do all those things that you do today. Tell us a little bit about what led to that.
I think absolutely it has to do with being a big reader. When I was a little girl, I can't remember when I first started reading, or my mother was reading to me and my younger brother. My mom was an English teacher, and so we had books all over the home, and part of our ritual was going to the library together, and all of us going to separate places in the library and then coming back with our books and talking about our books. And I think this process of picking stories and getting lost in stories made me want to mimic the process of telling stories or extending the stories I was reading. And I think that's how I got started as a writer. It was just, wanting to create my own worlds, I guess you could say.
The book is beautiful. I've been raving about it on social media. It's just such a beautiful cover. And of course, the topic and the way you approach it is quite unique. I have to admit that I did not know about Octavia Butler until I was way into my 20s, because I grew up in Port-au-Prince, and when I moved to the US, I did learn a little bit about um, American literature, but you know how it goes in many institutions. The accent was not made on Black authors.
Mhm.
So it took me kind of discovering science fiction books, because I've always had an interest in those types of books, but I was reading in French, and then I was reading the most popular writers, popular as in the ones that are presented in the schools that I attended. So it took me a little while, and it was so affirming to me that having this Black woman writing science fiction and being so good at it. Tell us a little bit about your experience with Octavia Butler. What is your Octavia Butler favorite moment?
Well, it's interesting that you said that about discovering her late, and this idea that, like, who's accented, who's focused, who's underscored when you're in school. I don't think in my school, I think probably in junior high or high school, maybe the only book we read by a Black author might have been Richard Wright, I think. But no Baldwin, certainly no women. And so it was left to us to find it. And again, back to luckily having a mother who happened to be an English teacher who knew what sort of curriculum, we were getting or not getting in school. Our house was full of books, African writers, African American writers, Latin American writers. She wanted to fill in the blanks. She's the person who had the Octavia Butler books on the shelf at home. At that time, though, I even have on my shelves now, I have her copies of Dawn, and I'm trying to see what else is up there that is I can reach, but that were on the shelves when I was younger and in school, that she would give to students because she wanted to give them something that they could relate, if not relate to, but could see themselves on some level on the page. And especially a Black woman writer. And that, to me, like the significant moment about Butler had to do with seeing her in person. And that was way later. I was in high school probably, or maybe even early college, and seeing her at readings around Los Angeles and just watching this person walk in, with her handbag on her shoulder, having gotten off the bus, to come to do this reading, and there's this crowd around her, and I was sitting, almost knee to knee to her. And when you're a young person who's a huge reader and not really calling yourself a writer out loud, but when you see something like that, someone like that, it's really powerful. And then she had this voice, and she spoke in this voice, and you're kind of pulled into that too. So she made seeing her and another local Black female writer, Wanda Coleman, poet, seeing them in the world, doing readings, doing signings, being on panels, it allowed me to see what that looked like. So they embodied this dream that I started to put together. So that was significant, seeing Butler.
For those who are watching us right now and who might wondering why I'm mentioning Octavia Butler, I forgot to mention the subtitle of the book, A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Sky, and the subtitle is The World of Octavia Butler. That's why we were talking about this literary legend. And I wanted to ask you about the role of creativity in your life, but also why you think it's important to talk about the creative experience through the lens of Butler's life. And I'm asking because while the question seems so obvious to me as a creative, right? Someone who spends so much time thinking about the art of writing and just who likes being surrounded by anything that requires some kind of creativity. When I was a teacher, I did notice from the very beginning how many people did not see the importance of a creative life. Whenever they were restructuring the curriculum and they were implementing budget cuts, it was always the arts that were suffering. That made me realize that some people don't get it. They don't understand the role of creativity. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this and get your insight. Why this book? Why is it even important to have a creative life?
I love this question because I think it's absolutely true. I grew up in the LA area in California, and when there was a Proposition 13, that took any sort of extracurricular program away that I think was perceived as soft. And so we had, the libraries were closed and limited hours. We lost the arts, so, before you could take visual arts and creative writing and different sculpture and pottery and things like that. And that started to go away. And this idea of, I think, having any kind of creative arts programming is so important to our own imagination, and being able to not just draw things on a page, but to be able to like unleash our imagination and understand what our imagination is for. And Butler really relied on her imagination, and that was so key to her becoming who she became, because if she had relied on what she saw in front of her, she would have felt very limited. And the idea of investing in her imagination, nurturing her imagination, being able to be open to what is beyond what she could actually see, allowed her to become something beyond anyone's imagination in her family. You know, people were like, you know, it's more important for you to get a job and get insurance and, you know, make sure that paycheck is coming in. And you have to think about, in the end, you need to have, you know, a good job so that when it's over, you have your Social Security and you have your pension. And she was just so like, but you're miserable. You're miserable in these jobs. And I want something more than that. And her imagination allowed her to keep pushing for something more. And that's what I wanted to look at with this book is, here's this person who was not encouraged to think in imaginative ways. You know, even though the people who loved her, they loved her. And so they wanted to protect her from a path that they thought might be ruinous for her. And she might not be able to take care of herself. So their redirection really was about, you know, caring for her and loving her. But she was like, I'm not hearing this. So I'm thinking, how does this person do this when there are no role models, no encouragement, no extra money to be involved in these programs? She didn't get a master's in writing. She didn't go on retreats. So how do you become a writer? And how do you have a creative life when you don't have much? And that's what really struck me as I was moving through the archive at the Huntington, where her papers are, is that she relied on what she had and didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about what she didn't have. And out of that, she drew riches.
What were some aspects of her life that really surprised you while you were conducting your research for this book?
I think one of the things that really did surprise me is really how alone she was on this road, you know, to becoming a writer, and how she learned to keep herself company. And I think, you know, there's one thing to read about, you know, like the child who is quiet, and as she would call herself, a hermit, and, you know, but she was very introverted, but she had such a lively imagination. And I think the thirst is what, and that it started at such a young age. That was it. It was like she was thinking about making plans at 10, 11, 12 years old. I mean, she was calendaring in her time to write, thinking about, like, over the weekend, I will keep my notebook open so I can write, you know. I just thought that's even beyond discipline. That really is drive. That was one of the main things that struck me, was how early that drive, showed up.
I love it. I love the idea of just this little girl planning her time.
Yes.
When we as adults, we have time management issues that we're still learning to get around. Let's talk about your work now, and the kind of time management skills that you have to apply. It's not every day that we get to talk to an award-winning journalist who can give us tips about how to make things happen. So if you could talk a little bit about being a journalist, what it requires in terms of planning around your projects
Mm,
so that
mm,
you still find time to write and do your work, those passion projects,
mm,
so you can still work on those. And
mm.
also, if you could talk a little bit about the challenges of being a journalist in modern times.
Okay, yes, those are two really good questions. And I think one of the things about, just in terms of plotting my time, and um, it is a juggle, because in journalism you're working, and I saw some of this in Butler's archive too, this idea you're living in the present, but you're also thinking about the future because you're thinking about deadlines. And you're thinking in stories in journalism, when you're working at a newspaper, or even if you're freelancing, you're thinking about, there's stories that run the day after something happens, and then there's stories that run a week after. There's certain things that people are curious about or need to know. And so you have to think about the reader and also the publication, and what they need. So in a way, in your head, you're like going back and forth in time yourself. And then with the research, you're going back in history. So it's this weird time travel thing about, so when you're pitching a story to a publication, you're trying to make it time peg it to something, or news peg, and the news peg could be, right now, I think we're going through with, well, so many things we're going through. So the stories need to, for extra oomph, you have to think about like, what's on people's minds and what's going to be on an editor's mind. So there's that challenge. If you're doing think pieces and arts pieces, same thing. It's when the product comes out. Or I'm also looking at when I see things out in the when I start to notice, I guess, certain themes popping up, or a repetition of things, or it's or it's, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. One of my editors used to say, as features writers, you're always looking at things in threes. If there are three things that pop up in a theme, that's a story, and it's easier to sell. And I agree with a little bit of that, because you are looking for what another editor of mine calls pings and resonances, and trends, and so you're writing about zeitgeist and what's on people's minds, and you're trying to explain things. And I think that's what, for me, pulled me into journalism. Yes, I write news and have written news, but I also am more interested in why something's happening, and how it came to be. Or if we're looking at things like, a law passing, or how people are voting, well, how is this going to impact the world around me? How is it going to impact people? So it's giving those statistics, face, form, texture, helping people understand how abstract things trickle down to them. So yes, so looking at trends and looking at just the effect of things. So that's how I'm always thinking about that. So that's one part of my brain. And the other part of the brain is really looking at historical impact. And so, like, I live in Los Angeles. It's a city that changes all the time. And so what is it like to live in a place where history is shifting under your feet all the time? And what does that mean for us? And so that's how I spend some of my other time writing about place and how place changes. And so for me, it is a juggle of looking at these different themes and trying to figure out which publication would be the best home for this kind of story, or, oh, this is a great news story. Let me get to this editor very quickly about this story. This is something I'm seeing on the ground happening right now. So you've got a couple of different brains working at once. And then I guess that goes into answering your question about the challenge right now. the thing that has happened for me, in the most major thing that's happened, is how quickly our news cycle moves now. When I first started in journalism, you know, the internet existed, but the newspaper I was working for, the LA Times, they weren't using it in the way that they are now, you know? And so we were like looking to put out one paper a day. And all the stories that would go on the web would support that. Now, of course, things are updated, you know, in minutes, and, you know, stories are constantly moving, and there's several deadlines in a day, and you could be responsible to, you know, for writing 4 to 5 different stories in one day. So the pace is different, the metabolism is different. So again, back to that, looking in the future, and being really nimble, and, you know, really being on your toes to be able to respond to something. But again, I'm so much more interested in reflective mode, and not chasing so much after something, but considering it, thinking about it, and like asking, okay, what does this really mean? And talking to people, other people, not just my opinion. I want to talk to other people, and kind of gather together a conversation on the page. I grew up in Los Angeles. I was born here, and I grew up in a neighborhood in Southwest LA, the Crenshaw district, which is it's West Side, South. And so it used to be, when I was younger, they used to refer to the neighborhood in a much more specific way. Then it got, in the 70s, got lumped into this thing of like South Central LA, and that was where all the Black people were. And that was the issue with it, is like, if I read about my neighborhood growing up in the newspaper, it was always negative news. It was always you know, gangs and murder and just mayhem, and it didn't speak to all the other things that were happening in my neighborhood. And it didn't mean that we had to ignore the things that were happening, the challenges. It meant that, like, there was a balance to it, and that there were real people there with families and struggles, and, you know, and joys. And I think that's part of it. It was like this frustration of like, but I don't recognize this narrative. Even as a little kid, I didn't get it. And so that was part of the reason I wanted to write, not necessarily journalism, but I wanted to write my neighborhood into being, onto the page, so other people could see it. So when I was little, I was writing short stories about my neighborhood and the kids in my neighborhood, and, you know, they were really rough little short stories with little drawings, you know, of what the people looked like. But I mean, I really did realize at a young age that there was a lack of that storyline, those images, those people. So later, when I decided to try journalism out, it was because I was reading alternative newspapers when I was in college, and I saw, oh, these papers allow you to go into more detail, to tell different kinds of stories, to go into different neighborhoods, to write, to spend more time, to write deeper. And so that's where I applied as an intern to see, like, well, maybe I can do this, because I had no journalism training at all. I didn't work on newspapers, but I always was somebody that was curious about what was happening around me.
Earlier, I asked you what it was that you discovered about Butler while researching her.
Mhm.
Now, I'm really curious about what you learned about yourself, because as you were talking about what drove you to writing, about your neighborhood and wanting other people to just see it, right? Now I'm thinking about you being the talented journalist that you are. You've kind of accomplished so much in your career. So there's like this distance between this small girl thinking about writing and now this accomplished adult. You're working on the Octavia Butler book, and what was your aha moment where you found out something about yourself that you did not expect, or did that
Mm.
happen, or did it instead kind of reinforce what you thought about um, a creative life and the type of experience that we need to go through in order to accomplish success in a career as a writer?
Wow. It's a really complex question in a really good way, because I guess I hadn't thought about what I learned about myself in the archive. One thing that surprised me a lot was I really did think I was just going in to do one small piece, which was this that's what I was assigned to do initially, this posthumous interview for a project called Clock Shop, for a project called Radio Imagination, for a nonprofit here in Los Angeles called Clock Shop. And it was a year-long initiative to get to pay tribute to Octavia Butler and her legacy and her work. And I was just going in to do this, to create this thing, and I wasn't really sure what it was going to be. And I had let the archive lead me. But before I knew it, I was really pulled in emotionally in a way that I don't think I expected. And I mean, I know I didn't expect. She left so much of herself there. And there were days that I would read something in one of her journals where things were so hard for her. I would get really emotional, and I would like have tears in my eyes, you know, like, and although I knew it got better, and I wish I could like be in her ear, just hang on, it'll get better. But I think this idea of, you know, as a journalist, you can get very close to people. You can pull things out of them that they didn't expect. I've heard stories I know that people haven't told anybody else because someone hasn't asked them the correct question. This was different than that. It was not sitting across from someone. It was actually, you know, almost inhabiting their body and their thoughts, you know, because it's like, you know, she's writing on the page, I'm looking over her shoulder at what she's writing about. So there was something very intimate about that process. And there were moments where I was thinking, you know, her fears and her worries are starting to kind of, I'm not going to say they were influencing my own, but I did realize how sensitive we all are in our creative lives and are in creative moments. Is like, it does take so much to keep going, you know, and especially when you are trying to do something new and you're trying to push yourself out of your comfort zones, and to be in someone else's head as they are doing that is really, I don't even have the word for it, but it's very powerful. And that will always stay with me, you know, what that was like. So I guess I learned about myself too, is that some of it felt very familiar. Some of the things that she was concerned about, some of the things that she was boxing with 40 years ago, 50 years ago, we as Black writers are boxing with now. So there was some similarity there, and you kind of wish like it should be different now. Why is she having to explain these things? Why are we still saying, you know, celebrating the only one or the first one? And but it was interesting to kind of go through these, like, the fire with her.
I want to recommend your book to everyone. I've been talking to my friends about it.
Oh, thank
I
you.
posted about it on IG. And speaking of IG, would you please tell people where they can find you? I know that you're pretty active on Instagram.
Yes.
Would you let us know where to find the book? Again, it's a beautiful, beautiful book. So how do we get our hands on it?
You can order directly from Angel City Press, and they will get it out to you. All of the independent bookstores have it. If they don't, you can order it. Absolutely. It's available online at the usual booksellers. I'm on IG at Lynell George Writer, and I'm also on Twitter at Lynell George.
Thank you again for joining us for this conversation. It was such a pleasure learning about you, learning a little bit more about your process, your journey, and some exclusive details about the book.
Yeah.
And I want to encourage everyone to get it again. I will put all the information under the screen on the YouTube page so that you guys can have access to the links that you need to order the book, because it's a must have. Lynell, thank you so much again for joining us. And we hope that you'll come back so that you can give us some updates about all the exciting things that you do, because you're certainly a badass Black girl.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time and the care and such wonderful questions. I'm really appreciative of all of it. Thank you.
See you soon.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.